Hello and welcome to Profiles and Issues, the cable television talk show that gives you in-depth interviews with prominent people in the news. I'm your host, Dennis Rudin. Our topic for this broadcast, the 2020 Democratic primary race for the United States Congress in the 17th Congressional District. Our profile and guest for this evening is Allison Fine, Democratic candidate for Congress. This seat is currently being held by Nita Lowey, who recently announced this past October that she would be retiring at the end of 2020 after more than 31 years of distinguished service. Ms. Fine is a prominent author, social change thought leader, and nonprofit founder. She has been instrumental in creating the field of online activism and has written 3 books on the topic. Allison has worked throughout her career to help grassroots organizations working in areas such as housing, food security, immigration, and women's issues achieve their missions. Allison Fine is a past president of Temple Bethpage Abraham in Tarrytown and a former faculty member of the Union of Reform Judaism and current member of the UJA Westchester Regional Advisory Council. She is a feminine activist who is the founder of the Network of Elected Women and most recently the chair of the National Board of NARAL Pro-Choice America Foundation. She is married and the mother of 3 sons. Allison Fine, welcome to Profiles and Issues.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to change slightly the format and address the coronavirus issue. Before I start our interview, it has just recently come to Westchester County as we tape this program in March of 2020. In order to better educate our viewers and ease public anxiety, White Plains Hospital has established a coronavirus hotline by calling 914-681-2900. Again, that's a coronavirus hotline by calling 914-681-2900. This number will be periodically displayed on your screen throughout the program. This hotline gives you regularly updated reports 24 hours a day and will also connect you with a hospital representative if you think you may have the symptoms for guidance and advice. For additional information, go to the New York State website at www.health.newyork.gov. Again, that's www.health.newyork.gov. Okay, Allison, now I think we may want to discuss a few things. What is your assessment of the federal government's handling of the coronavirus?
Well, first let me say I think that George Latimer and the County of Westchester's response has been fantastic. They've moved quickly. They've been very clear with the public of how to get information through hotlines like you just mentioned, and how to get testing and what's happening with local communities, and the schools, the individual school districts have been as well. The federal government's response has not been nearly as good. There's clearly a disconnect between what President Trump is saying and what his administration and health officials are saying. But the most serious issue right now is that the testing kits aren't getting out to people as much as they promised to have 1 million tests available by this week. They don't seem to be available. In fact, I just saw right before coming on data showing that the number of tests is going down instead of going up. So in a time of the need for really steady leadership and for doing exactly what you say you're going to do, which is the most comforting thing people need to hear, that is not at all happening by the federal government, and that's enormously disconcerting to people.
Right. I understand that, and again, to my audience, I don't mean to be playing the politics of this, but I understand that Governor Cuomo is very frustrated with the federal government's response, and so he has taken on his own personal state initiative to contact the labs directly to make some kind of business arrangement or arrangement for New York State residents so that we can get this implemented
and I
quickly.
should mention as well, I think the governor has done a terrific job in announcing a state of emergency, putting together a state of emergency funding for small businesses and to get to school districts and to families, and to make sure we're opening up testing to private labs to allow more tests to happen.
Now, from what I heard on the news this morning, Nancy Pelosi has already, or was going to present to the afternoon session of Congress legislation to pass on this immediately. And the Republican leader, is that Kevin McCarthy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he said he needed some time to weigh this. And so the only thing I would say to the public, I'm not saying who's right or who's wrong. I don't know. I'm not in a position, and I don't believe telling people how to think. But I would I would put pressure on your representatives or the congressional leaders, whether they live in your district or not. All you have to do is email them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can go on today on the computer and find out their emails and let them know whether you want action on this or not. Because that's the only way it's going to happen.
I think that's right. I know yesterday the Senate blocked legislation to provide pay for sick leave for hourly workers. And I think that's a cruel thing to do, and I think it's a counterproductive thing to do, because we have people who can't afford to stay home and not work, and that's not a good way to stop a pandemic from spreading.
Okay, thank you for those. All right, now we'll go to the regular scheduled questions, although the world moves so quickly today. What made you decide to run for Congress?
Well, we're living in, we could say, interesting times, Ken, or very frightening times in some ways. And we know that we're having enormous economic problems and, frankly, enormous problems with democracy and the way that it works. And everything that I've done in my career, locally as a leader at my temple, as the creator of the Network of Elected Women, nationally as a pioneer in the use of technology for good, as chair of the National Board of NARAL, as you mentioned, has been focused on how to build big, broad coalitions to move people, organizations, communities forward. And I think that's exactly the kind of leadership that we need in Congress right now. And I am ready to step up to this position to provide it for our constituents and for the country.
All right. Any specific goals?
So the first thing that we need to do, what's making so many people so anxious, is economically it feels like the ground is moving beneath our feet. 40% of the workforce right now are people who are on contract or hourly or in the gig economy, which means by definition so many of those people don't have benefits.
Right.
Very hard to make ends meet, very hard to build wealth if you're younger. If you are just going gig to gig, and you might be buried by student loans and you have no benefits.
Right.
So job number one, I think, is creating a universal set of benefits that stays with people instead of staying with the job. So everybody who works should have access to a retirement account that they can invest in, and sick time, and paid family leave, and access to a union as well, to try to make people whole financially. So to me, that's job number one. Then we have to lower the cost of health insurance and drugs. We have to make much more affordable housing in a place like Westchester and Rockland County, so that we have to help people put the pieces back together financially.
You know, your goals are very admirable, but when you're fighting against these big lobbyists in Washington, who at times, you know, literally, tell lawmakers when to get up, when to sit down. I mean, you know, that's a tough job.
So here's why it's so important that people like me get elected. I am not taking any corporate PAC money. And just as importantly, I'm the only candidate in this race who isn't career government, career politician. So I'm coming from outside of that system. I'm not beholden to anybody. And like so many other women around the country, we're standing up to say, you know, we're ready to serve, ready to help fix these problems. And that's the way that we're going to need to help get us to the next chapter in our country's history.
All right. I've got to ask you this because your background is from NARAL.
Yeah.
From my perspective, being a follower and earlier an activist in politics, you know, women have made tremendous strides, and they'll continue. But what I'm wondering is, you know, and I understand this, women leaders often quote the statistics. I don't have them, but the amount of women population and probably registered voters are much higher than men.
Right.
But yet, from what I've been able to see from the results and primaries and other things, it goes beyond sex. Many times, if whether it's a man or a woman, if they run and they have an intellectual background. Now, you may not example a Elizabeth Warren. No one doubts her intellect, but yet a lot of let's say, not highly educated women were not necessarily comfortable or had problems relating to her. So do you think the challenge of NARAL and your organization isn't just with men, but it's with women also?
So that's a complicated question.
I don't want you to spend the whole time.
I think as a society, we struggle with women in leadership positions, no question about it. One of the reasons why I started the Network of Elected Women is because we're electing enormous numbers of women at municipal levels, town councils, county commissions across the country, and in particular here in Westchester. However, once election day comes and goes, everybody goes home, and these women are sitting at these tables largely alone, and they are harassed in extraordinary ways, and they don't run for re-election at the same rate that men do.
Yeah.
So all that effort to get them elected is wasted if they're not running for re-election. And we really have to recognize, first of all, the level of harassment makes these jobs not doable for many women.
But do the women themselves that work hard in these campaigns, and I've seen it, do they ever, especially the older women, I guess it's easy with the younger women, do they ever say to themselves, gee, I bet a woman could do just as good or if not better in that job?
Well, certainly what we've seen since 2016 are enormously high numbers of women voting, as you're saying, women running for office. I have been so buoyed by the number of women, particularly older women, who are thrilled that I'm running. And I find that enormously energizing right now. So there is sexism, no question, in the system, in our country, but that's also why we need more and more women to run and win elections and to stay in office.
All right. I didn't mean to cut in, but I had to ask that because of your background.
Oh, sure.
I figured you could give us some insight. Any other legislative priorities or goals?
Well, certainly the need to codify Roe in Congress is critically important.
I have a follow-up question to that.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the Supreme Court case that is currently in front of...
the Louisiana case?
Yes, yes. Maybe you'll tell briefly the couple of sentences, tell our viewers what that case involves.
So it's very similar to a case that came up from Texas a few years ago of requiring doctors to have admitting rights at local hospitals.
Right.
In order to perform abortions. It would, if that provision were in place, it has been stopped, but if it were in place, the entire state of Louisiana would have one clinic that provides abortions.
As opposed to 3 now, correct?
Which isn't great to begin with.
But you don't want to go backward.
You certainly don't want to. It's dreadful. Women have a right to abortion. That was the whole purpose of Roe. But having a right is not the same as having access. And what we've had is 50 years of having access chipped away for women, particularly poor women of color.
You know, I don't want to get on a big topic, but just to throw it out there. Maybe the technique, maybe we need to relook at the technique of the way we have these Supreme Court hearings, because in recent years it's been vicious on both sides. It's been character assassination on both sides. And how are you going to get people to step forth to say what they want to when the rest of their life may be damaged completely, and they may not even benefit from their testimony, the particular cause that they represent? Do you think we need to have more civility in politics and try to get back to...
I think it begins with civility in society.
Okay, very good.
We have had a rise in hate crimes since 2016 in this district, and within that rise, you know, Cam, the largest proportion of that is a rise of anti-Semitism in this district. And it's horrible, and it's not helped by the fact of having racist statements that come out of the White House that have, I think, given people permission to be meaner. Certainly issues with Israel have spurred increases in hate.
I was going to just ask you about that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And look, as a Jew, as a former president of my synagogue, as the mother of 3 kids who've been harassed on their college campuses by BDS protesters, this is enormously disconcerting, and I think we need to start in schools, teaching the difference between truth and lies and hate, and enabling kids to practice debating issues civilly, because we have gotten out of that practice entirely. And I also think we need to actually hire local community mediators whose job it is to make sure that people and different communities are engaging with one another. We don't know one another as neighbors the way that we used to.
If you get into Congress, when you get into Congress, would you be able? Would you work? Is it possible to establish a federal interagency task force on hate crimes?
I think that's certainly one way to address it. Nita Lowey is chair of the subcommittee on anti-Semitism, a subcommittee I would like to be sitting on as well.
I was going to ask you other committees, but
yes.
Let's follow up.
Yes, but so certainly looking at hate crimes and how to reduce them in our district, around the country, on land and online, is awfully important. And one thing we could talk about as well is the fact that the online platforms don't do nearly enough to try to reduce hate speech on their platforms as well.
Okay. So very quickly, I know you probably support Resolution 246 as proposed by Eliot Engel, House Foreign Affairs Committee, that opposes efforts to delegitimize State of Israel and boycott, divest, and sanction the country's products and services.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that the boycott movement hurts everybody in the region, and particularly hurts Israel. And I would in no way be in support of boycott and divestment.
All right. Now, also, what is your opinion on the House and Senate's recent votes forbidding President Trump from attacking Iran unless there is an imminent threat or Congress declares war?
Well, I think it's part of a general lack of confidence we have in President Trump as commander-in-chief right now, and in his judgment of how to use the military forces. One thing that's critically important, not only to the safety of our country, but to the security of Israel, is making sure that Iran is not creating nuclear weapons and not supporting terrorism around the world. I think the sanctions are being successful in helping to reduce the threat of Iran. And so I'm certainly in favor of ensuring that Iran is, the threat of nuclear Iran is reduced at all costs.
Do you see a decline in the checks and balances, Congress's checks and balances over the executive branch of government? And quick example, during the Trump administration, as a result of the impeachment hearings, hostile witnesses no longer felt compelled to testify before Congress, and the withholding of congressional funds for the Ukraine. I mean, you know, as a history teacher and as a citizen who follows these things and occasionally does read the Constitution, I don't totally understand the president's interpretation. Like your comment on that.
Well, I certainly think the House did the right thing in bringing the impeachment charges. There was no choice if you believe in the rule of law and in democracy, but that
but I
had
mean,
to
do
happen.
you see a decline in the checks and balances also? Do you think that if you got into Congress, what would you do to try to, would you accept this new status quo, or would you try to change it?
So I think it's mainly a reflection of having an administration and a president with no regard for the rule of law. And that's where the fault lies. And I think we need a different president that believes in democracy and believes that the executive branch has to play by the rules.
I mean, the way Congress functions today, it seems like unless you have the votes, there's no respect for the minority. I remember when Tip O'Neill used to be able to cut a deal with Ronald Reagan, or vice versa. Now, they didn't agree on a lot of issues. You didn't always get what you wanted, but at least the government wasn't in stalemate. At least the government functioned. It went along. It wasn't this bitter rivalry.
Well, we have other. So part of the root of the problem here is the lack of campaign finance reform. As you said, so many of the members of Congress are captive of interests and moneyed interests in particular. So that's a part of the dysfunction that has gone on. The gerrymandering has made it possible for people not to be willing to compromise and be at the extremes of the political spectrum.
Just quickly, California has a system where neither of the two parties do the gerrymandering.
That's right.
They have a commission.
I think that should be a national law. I really do. I think gerrymandering should not be done by partisan issue.
Okay. Keep going. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Did I stop your thought there? What other committees, if any, would you like to serve on?
So I'd certainly like to be on the Science and Technology Committee of the Commerce Department. This is both an interest I have. I've been working for the last 2 years on contract with the Gates Foundation to explore ways that artificial intelligence and automation can be used for social good. We're really far behind, Ken, as a country, and in particular in Washington, D.C., in understanding what's coming up with automation, what robots are going to do to jobs, and what's about to happen with all the data.
You're the only candidate that I've interviewed that has addressed that.
I know, because I'm the only one with the expertise to talk about it.
And I'm not saying teachers are perfect, although I like to think so as a teacher, but seriously, there is a human component of dealing with people. And you probably having children, and you see it with other kids. A lot of times they don't even talk to each other. They just...
I know. They're on their screens.
I mean, and there's a lack of human compassion.
So the technology is racing far ahead of our ability right now to manage it well and to hold on to the best parts of ourselves. And this is where leadership comes in, and knowledge, right? You have to understand how the technology works. So for instance, most people in D.C. right now think of Amazon like Sears. Amazon is not Sears. It's a whole different kind of animal at a scale we've never seen.
A lot of retail.
A lot of local retail.
Are going out of it.
It is helping local entrepreneurs create businesses. You don't need all the infrastructure you did, but we have a huge problem on main streets with a third of retail stores already closed.
And malls.
And malls. So that's one issue. We have automation that's just coming online right now, but going very, very quickly. That is going to be what I call an equal opportunity disruptor. Radiologists are going to lose their jobs, Wall Street analysts, paralegals, as well as retail and fast food workers. So across the board, we're going to be losing a lot of jobs. And we have to look at when is automation okay by itself? When does it require human element? So for instance, you'd never have an airplane that's only on autopilot without a human being in the
Yeah,
cockpit,
it's a backup.
right? What are we going to do about autonomous vehicles? And in addition, then, how are we going to invest in workforce development so that human beings have a next career to go to?
And something to concentrate on to keep them going. Not just economically, which of
Yes.
course they need, but to sustain them mentally.
You need a job. People need to get up
psychologically.
and go out into the world,
I agree.
particularly after this virus, and have something to do, something to contribute, some way of making a living. And we need serious leadership on that front before it happens without leadership from Washington. So that's one issue. The second reason I want to be on the Technology and Science Committee is to make sure we're investing in a big way through the federal labs, through the university system, in the next generation of renewable energy technologies for climate change. We've missed the lithium battery generation of technology, but there will be next ones. So for instance, there's nascent research on sodium and sulfur batteries. This is a place where the United States can be at the forefront, create the technologies, and then keep the manufacturing here as well. So someplace like Buchanan that's going to lose Indian Point and 2,000 jobs, well, maybe we can create a sulfur battery factory there instead.
Yes,
Right.
these are some very pertinent issues that you bring up. That and I'm not, that just traditional politicians don't always think about until it's
Right.
thrown in their face.
That's right.
Now, the other thing which ties right into this, fake news. How are people going to make intelligent decisions? We did a show on fake news, but I've seen it out there now where they put a person's voice that they get an actor to imitate them,
Right.
but it isn't really the actor, whether it's President Obama or you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
These commercials are not credible. What are people going to do? Have to run to their computers for fact check for everything they see, or what?
Yes. First thing is we need to start teaching in schools media literacy and how to discern, how to go through the steps of verifying the information that a person is seeing and being careful about what you're sharing. So that needs to start with the kids. In addition, though, Ken, there is some responsibility from platforms like Facebook to do a better job of, at the very least, putting up a flag on political ads saying this ad hasn't been verified. If they're not willing to verify it, they can at least tell us that it hasn't been verified, and they're not even willing to do that. And so I think as a member of Congress, I would be holding many hearings with Google and with Facebook to push them to be investing much more in ensuring that we understand if something has been verified online or not.
Reading your bio, there were tons of other questions that I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
And we've run out of time. But Allison Fine, I wish you well in your campaign.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
And we hope to have you back in the not so distant future.
Thank you. Stay well and stay healthy, Ken.
Thank you. All right, all of our programs can be seen at no charge on demand on your computer or iPhone at any time on our website at www.thedennisrudenshow.com or www.profilesandissues.com. Please send your comments about the program, interact with us, and learn about issues on our Facebook pages at facebook.com/The Dennis Rudin Show. All of our programs are broadcast on Optimum Cablevision and Verizon Fios. Check your local cable calendar for time, day, and channel. This is Dennis Rudin saying so long for Profiles and Issues.